Greetings everyone, this is Professor TJ Wilkins. In this tutorial, I'll teach you how to draft the basic trouser pattern. Let's get started. For this tutorial, I'm using the trouser foundation directions from the text Pattern Making for Fashion Design by Helen Armstrong. Also, I'm using size 10 measurements which were provided in the textbook. So the tools that I used for this tutorial are pattern paper, yardstick, mechanical pencil. I used a clear ruler, a hip curve, L square, measuring tape, paper cutting scissors, magic tape, and French curve. Cut out a 30 by 42 piece of pattern paper and tape it down to the table with the longest side laying horizontally. Locate the middle of the paper and use a yardstick to draw a line all the way down from the top to the bottom. I'm using a black Sharpie so that you can see the lines, but it's best that you use a pencil. At the top of the center line, measure down about 1 inch. Mark and then label A. A to B is the waist to ankle measurement. Place the ruler at point A and measure down 38 inches and mark. Label the mark B. A to D is the crotch depth measurement. Place the ruler at point A and measure down 10 3/4 inches. Mark. Then label that point D. D to C is the hip depth, and that is 1/3 of the distance from A to D. So if you remember, A to D is the crotch depth, and that was 10 3/4 inches. So that means that you'll take 10 3/4 and divide it by 3. So I got 3.583. In fraction format on the ruler, I'll measure out about 3 9/16. Measure up 3 9/16 inches from point D and mark. Then label the mark C. The knee level is between the distance from B to D. You can use your tape measure to measure from point D to B, then fold your tape measure in half to find the middle. Next, you'll mark at the middle of the distance between the 2 points. From that middle mark, measure up 1 inch and mark it. Now this is going to be your knee depth. Label it E. So A is the waist, C is the hip, D is the crotch, E is the knee, and B is your ankle. Now use your L square to square a line through all of those points. So I'll start off at the waist, point A, and square a line through point A. Next, place the L square at point C, the hip, and square a line through point C. Place the L square at point D, the crotch, and square a line through point D. Place the L square at point E, the knee, and square a line through point E. Place the L square at point B, the ankle, and square a line through point B. Label point A, the waist. So this line represents the waist level. This line at C is the hip level, so label it hip. The line through point D is the crotch, so label that crotch depth. The line through point E is the knee, label it knee. The line through point B is the ankle. And it's also the hemline for the pant, so label it ankle/hemline. Once again, here is your waist level, your hip, your crotch, your knee, and your ankle. On the left side is the back of the pant, so label it back. The front is on the right side, so label it front. Let's turn this around to focus on shaping the top of the pant. C to F is the back hip measurement. On the back hip line, we need to mark the width of the hip. Measure 9 7/8 of an inch from point C and mark it. Label that mark F. We need to create a frame to shape out the back pant. So at the crotch level on the back, measure out 9 7/8 of an inch from point D. This is the same measurement as C to F. Mark and label G. A to H on the waist level is the same distance as C to F, which is 9 7/8. Place your ruler at point A and measure out 9 7/8 of an inch. Mark and label it H. At point H, use the ruler to square down a vertical line connecting point H, F, and G. G to X equals 1/2 G to H. So that means we need to measure the distance from G to H and divide it by 2. Or if you don't want to do the math, measure from G to H with your tape measure, fold it in half, and mark the middle. Label the middle mark X. Let's determine the measurement needed to measure out the back crotch. To do that, measure the distance from G to D and then divide that measurement by 2. So let's do the math. G to I is 1/2 of G to D, right? So what you need to do is measure that distance from G to D, and that measurement is 9 7/8. Then you'll divide 9 7/8 by 2. The answer is 4.9375. And that in fraction format is actually 4 15/16. Now, I know that some of you might not be too fond of fractions, and that's okay. You can round it up to 5 inches. I am going to keep it at 4 15/16 for this tutorial. Place the ruler at point G and measure out 4 15/16. Or you can just measure out 5 inches to save your sanity. Mark and label I. Now let's work on the front. At the hip level, measure out 9 3/8 of an inch from point C and mark. Label the mark J. We need to create a frame to shape out the front. So from point D at the crotch depth, measure out 9 3/8 of an inch and mark. Label the mark K. A to L is the same measurement as C to J. So place a ruler at point A, measure out 9 3/8 of an inch and mark it. Then label it L. K to X equals 1/2 of K to L. So that means you'll measure this line, K to L, and divide it by 2. Or if you don't want to do the math, use your tape measure to measure from point K to L. Fold your tape measure in half and mark at the middle. Then label the middle mark X. Let's do the calculation for the crotch extension on the crotch level. So that means we need to measure from K to D and then divide that measurement by 4. It's math time! So K to M equals 1/4 of K to D. K to D measurement equals 9 1/8. 9 1/8 divided by 4 equals 2.2812. Okay, so here's where the math gets a little tricky. 2.2812 in fraction format is 5703 over 2,500. We're not going to find that on the ruler. So I'm going to round this up to a measurable number that is accessible on the ruler, and it's a little bit more than this 2.2812 amount. In instances like these, I would rather have more than less. So I'll round this up to 2 3/8. Therefore, the K to M measurement is 2 3/8. Measure out 2 3/8 inches from point K and mark. Label the mark M. It's time to work on the back dart intake, which is located on the back of the pant. Place the ruler at point H, then measure out 3/4 of an inch and mark. Label the mark N. We need to measure out the spacing for the back waist measurement and the darts. So for you to understand this better, let's dive into the math. It's math time! So N to O is the back waist measurement plus 2 1/4 inches. According to the textbook size 10 measurements, the back waist measurement is 6 5/8 inches. 2 1/4 inches was added onto the back waist measurement. There are 2 darts in the back of the pant. Each of those darts are 1 inch wide. The 2 darts add up to 2 inches. This pant draft is for a woven fabric, so a 1/4 inch extra ease was added to the amount, hence 2 1/4 inches. Therefore, N to O equals 6 5/8 plus 2 1/4 inches, and that means N to O equals 8 7/8. N to O equals 8 7/8 inches. Place the ruler at point N, measure out 8 7/8 of an inch, and mark. Label the mark O. N to P equals 3 inches. There are 2 darts on the back waistline. N to P is the placement for the first dart. Place your ruler at point N, measure 3 inches, and mark. Then label the mark P. Each of the 2 back darts are 1 inch wide. So, place your ruler at point P, measure 1 inch, and mark. Then label the mark P1. Okay, so the P1 label is not in the text. I just placed that there so you can know which point I am talking about. The distance from the first dart to the second dart is 1 1/4 inches. So place your ruler at point P, measure 1 1/4 inches, and mark it. Label the mark P2. P2 is the placement for the second dart. Place the ruler at point P2, measure 1 inch, and mark. Label that mark P3. So P to P1 is the 1 inch intake or opening for the first dart. P1 to P2 is the 1 1/4 inches distance between the first dart and the second dart. And P2 to P3 is the 1 inch intake for the second dart. Mark the center of the first dart. To do that, measure 1/2 inch from point P, then mark the center and square down a vertical line that is 4.5 inches long. Let's create the dart legs. Use the ruler to draw a line from point P to the bottom of the center line. Then draw a line from point P1 to the bottom of the center line. By the way, guys, I got a bit dart leg happy and drew the dart legs in a little bit early, but you can wait until you're done drafting the waistline and shaping the waistline before you draw in your dart legs. Okay, let's create the second back dart. P2 to P3 is the opening for the second dart. Measure 1/2 inch from point P2 to find the center of the dart. Then square down a vertical line that is 4.5 inches long. Let's add in the dart legs. Use the ruler to draw a line connecting point P2 to the bottom of the center line. Then draw a line connecting point P3 to the bottom of the center line. Now the back has 2 darts. Each of them are 1 inch wide and 4.5 inches long. Now let's mark the front waistline and create the front darts. It's math time! So L to Q is the front waist measurement plus 1 1/4 inches. The front waist measurement is 7 inches. There are also 2 darts on the front pant, and each of those darts are 1/2 inch wide. The 1/2 inch wide intake for both darts adds up to 1 inch. As I stated before, this pant draft is for a pant made out of a woven fabric. For most woven fabric, you need to add ease for the garment to fit comfortably. So in this case, a 1/4 inch ease was added to the waistline. So the total amount of the dart, which adds up to 1 inch, plus a 1/4 inch ease, adds up to 1 1/4. This is why L to Q equals 7 plus 1 1/4, and the total amount is 8 1/4. L to Q is 8¼ inches. So place your ruler at point L and measure out 8¼ inches, then mark. Label the mark Q. It's time to place the dart. Measure 3 inches from point L, mark, and label the mark R. Point R is the placement for the first front dart. The dart is 1/2 inch wide. So from point R, measure out 1/2 inch and mark. Label the mark R2. Points R2 up to point R4 are not in the text. These are just extra labels that I added for reference purposes. The spacing between the first and the second dart is 1¼ So place your ruler at point R2, measure out 1¼ inches and mark. Label the mark R3. From point R3, measure out 1/2 inch and mark. Label the mark R4. These new points are the opening for the front darts. Find the center between points R and R2. In this case, it's 1/4 inch. Measure 1/4 inch from point R or R2 and mark. The length of the front dart is 3 inches. Therefore, square down a 3 inches long vertical line from the center point. Let's draw in the dart legs. Place the ruler at point R2, then connect it to the bottom of the vertical line. Draw in your dart leg. Place the ruler at point R and connect it to the bottom of the vertical line, then draw in your other dart leg. Let's create the second dart. Measure and mark a 1/4 inch from point R4 or R3 to find the center between the 2 points. Square down a 3 inches long vertical line from the center point. Now let's draw in the dart legs. Place the ruler at point R4 and connect it to the bottom of the vertical line, then draw in your dart leg. Place the ruler at point R3 and connect it to the bottom of the vertical line, then draw in your dart leg. Let's work on creating the back crotch. Place the ruler at point N and square up a 1/4 inch line. Label the top of that line S. Now use your ruler to draw a diagonal line connecting point S to point X. This diagonal line represents the top part of the crotch. Next, we need to square a 2-inch diagonal guideline from point G. To ensure that the diagonal line is in the correct location, let's square in a 1-inch guide. G to T is 2 inches. Therefore, measure 2 inches diagonally from point G. Make sure your ruler goes through the corner of the 1-inch guide. Draw a 2 inches diagonal line to point G. Label the top of the line T. Now we need to draw in the back crotch. Draw a curve that connects from point H to the top of point T all the way to point X. This curve starting from point S ending to point H represents your back crotch. Now let's work on creating the front crotch. Similar to what we did when we were creating the back crotch, for the front, we also need to draw in a 1-inch guide. Place the ruler at point K and square out a 1-inch guide. From point K, we now need to draw in a 1.5-inch diagonal line which extends through the corner of the guide. Label the top of the diagonal line U. Next, we'll use the French curve to connect from point X to point J to U and M. Position the French curve so it connects from point X to J to U and M, and then draw in the front crotch. M to L is the front crotch. Here at the top is the front waist. I to N is the back crotch, and here is the back waist. In order to shape the back waistline, use the hip curve to draw a slight curve from point S to point O. I'm gonna use the ruler to extend the darts up for now, but all of this can be fixed when you true the darts at the end. Now let's fix the front pant waistline. On the front crotch at point L, we need to lower the waistline a 1/4 inch. Place the ruler at point L, measure down a 1/4 inch and mark. To shape the front waist, we would need to use the hip curve to draw a curved line from the 1/4 inch mark to point Q. Place your hip curve at the top of the front pant and draw a slight inward curved line from the 1/4 inch mark to point Q. L to Q is the new front waistline. Now we need to shape the front and back hip curve. At the back, place the hip curve at point O and lay it so that it blends into the line extending from point C. Okay, so notice that I placed the hip curve at the 8-inch mark to draw in the shape. On your end, it may be a different measurement or part of the ruler that you choose. Either way, use a part of the ruler that creates a natural shape to represent the hip. Next, draw in the hip curve. Let's draw in the hip curve for the front. Place the hip curve at point Q and blend it into the line extending from point C. For consistency, once again, I place the hip curve at the 8-inch mark. Now draw in the front hip curve. So here is the back crotch, the back waistline, and the back side seam. Over here, starting from point M, is the front crotch, the front pant waistline, and the front pant side seam. Now we need to locate the back trouser crease line. In the text, the directions for that says D to V equals 1/2 of D to I plus a 1/4 inches. D to I is the back crotch level. You can choose to measure from D to I, divide that measurement by 2 and add a 1/4 inch to it, or you could choose to measure from D to I, then fold the tape measure in half to find the center. Mark your center. And then measure and mark a 1/4 inch from the center mark. So take your ruler and place it at the center and measure a 1/4 inch and mark. Then label that point V. Now let's locate the front trouser crease line. The text says D to W equals 1/2 D to M plus 1/4 inches. D to M is the front crotch level. Once again, you can do the math by dividing D to M by 2 and then adding 1/4 inch, or bust out that trusty tape measure, measure from D to M, fold the tape measure in half, mark the middle, and then measure 1/4 inch from that center mark. And label it W. Point W is the crease line location for the front, and point V is the crease line location for the back. Turn the pattern paper horizontally so that it's easy to draft in the rest of the trouser leg. Now, if you have long arms and you prefer to keep it vertical, whatever works. Square a line in through point V to draw in the back trouser crease line. You can use an L square or a yardstick to do this. The crease line must extend from the waist all the way down to the hemline. Now square in the front green line from point W. Once again, make sure to extend the crease line from the waist all the way down to the hemline. Let's fix the back trouser opening on the hemline. On the left side of the crease line, measure 4.5 inches and mark. On the right side of the back crease line, measure 4.5 inches and mark. So each mark measures 4.5 inches from the back crease line. For the back trouser inseam, draw a line connecting from point I at the crotch to the hemline mark. Place a yardstick at point I in the hem mark and then draw in your line. For the back outseam, blend a line from the hip at point C down to the hem mark. So place your yardstick at point C and connect it to the hem mark at the bottom. Then draw in your line. This line is the outseam for the back pant. If needed, use your ruler to fix the line at the knee level. So here is the back crotch. Here is the waistline. This area is the side seam or the outseam for the back pant. Here is the back pant opening or hemline. And here is the inseam. Okay, let's work on the front. At the front trouser hemline, measure 4 inches on the left side of the crease line. And then mark. Measure 4 inches on the right side of the crease line and mark. Then merge a line connecting from point C down to the hem mark. Place the yardstick at point C, connect it at the hem mark, then draw in the front trouser outseam. For the front trouser inseam, connect a line from point M to the hemline mark. Place the yardstick at point M and connect to the hemline mark, then draw in the front pant inseam. Here is the outseam for the front trouser, the hemline, the inseam, the crotch, and the waistline. And we're done. Like, share, and subscribe to get more content like this.